Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thanks for your testimony today, Semper Fi. Just a couple questions, and I've got a ton, but I'll just hit two big ones. Bill, you mentioned a number of issues about employment and things like this, and one of the things I'm concerned about, I've read the entire SR6 report, and I've been, after I got elected, to as many of the committee hearings as I could. And I'm wondering if we're fighting a microeconomic problem when we should be looking at the macroeconomic problem. And I'll give you a couple different examples. It's just by looking at me, you can see that we're getting to be an elderly state. The gray hair, and when you started talking 5 decades, I remember when that 5 decades started when I was in my 20s. I'm concerned that we've got macroeconomic issues at the state that we're not solving, that you are feeling the effects of and the brunt of. When you look at the number of volunteer firefighters has plummeted, you also have to look at our overall macroeconomic tax policies for corporations as an example, where we've got I'm a CPA, highest in the East Coast by far, and whether or not the number of Fortune 500 companies that existed in the Commonwealth in the 1960s versus today is a mere fraction of what it was. Are these macroeconomic issues that your solutions are actually micro solutions to put Band-Aids on a hemorrhage?
First of all, thank you for addressing the Schwab group in Schaeferstown. I was in the audience. I looked a little different, but I was in the audience, and thank you for being with us that day. And I remember some of your comments about the economic perspective and so on. And I believe you're absolutely right. So let's put it into some reality perspectives of 30 years ago versus today. 30 years ago, a typical community had blue-collar workers who were members of the fire department. Right. You had white-collar workers who also were members, but you didn't see a lot of them get their hands dirty. They were the bank president, or they might have owned 2 or 3 businesses in town, and they were the president, the vice president, the treasurer, and so on, while the blue-collar workers traditionally were the ones who handled the fires. They worked 3 shifts. They worked 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7, and they had a lot of flexibility. Maybe they were on swing shifts and so on. That's all gone. Those steel mill jobs are gone. Those coal mine jobs are gone. Those industrial jobs are gone. And we can look around and say every one of our communities has experienced that an economic dynamic change. Well, in today's world, when a job is not a 7.5 hour per day job, I'll bet you every one of us work a 10 or 12 hour day most of the time. That 3 or 4 or 5 hours of a day that were disposable time are no longer there for any of us to be able to volunteer for much of anything. So if you ask me, are we putting a Band-Aid on it? Absolutely. And the Band-Aid right now is about to go pop. And all we're going to do now is start putting Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids if we don't look at some type of restructure. And we've got some good ones here. And then I can't help but comment on Chief McGarvey's most recent comments about the commission. If we look at what other states have done to try to sustain volunteerism and at the same time assure that an infrastructure is in place to provide emergency response, Texas, Delaware, North Carolina, and West Virginia all have done that. They've all done that from the state level through, if you call it a commission if you want, or call it some structure, but they've all done a state structure to help local entities, not to run a statewide fire department. And again, they are taking those local communities, trying to find out what works. And frankly, if a system works differently in a rural community than in a suburban community, well, that's okay. If that's what those people want, can afford, because all fire protection is really local, and the delivery models become local, which goes back to his comments about standard of cover. So yes, this is an economic issue as much as it is a safety infrastructure issue.
Outstanding. And Chief, your comment that was absolutely brilliant. I just want to repeat what you said. The 27 recommendations that must be acted on to save us from total collapse. You know, I do corporate restructuring for a living, and I'm from Emmitsburg, Maryland, where the National Fire Academy is. One of the things that's got me really concerned is that these recommendations over all these years have been either postponed or whatever the case may be. But at what point in time, I come out of the manufacturing arena. I used to work as a supplier to Oshkosh Truck, a lot, a consultant to KME and some other things, fire apparatus. One of the things that we saw on our end is a significant amount of work that was done in the local firefighters ran the cost of the equipment up by 20 to 30% more than if a more standardized vehicle were acquired. Is there anything that can be done in that regard to where we look at this as a holistic approach, not just let's put more money into it, but let's see, because we do need to fix these solutions, but because it will truly be shame on all of us if that collapse occurs. And I happen to agree with your assessment, but if we don't all recognize where the cost drivers is, because as an example, fee for reimbursement, I think is a bad model. I'm trying to buy capability. When I need a fire engine or when I need an EMS service, I need it. I don't want it to be depend upon who's got the more severe injury as to where it's going to get reimbursed from. We need to recognize, in my mind, that this is a societal cost, but I think we have to collaboratively work together to look at the cost side of this equation as well as the other side of the equation relative. And so just thoughts, perspective.
Regionalization, the county level is for the fire service, I think, is good. I mean, there's a lot of duplicative services out there. I can tell you in my township alone, I have 6 ladder trucks. I have more rescues and squads than the city of Philadelphia. So there's a lot of duplicated services. Do we need to do that? No. But the thing is, local governments responsible for the fire and EMS, they need their volunteers. The volunteers want the trucks. So that's one way they keep them. But the fact is, we just don't have the numbers today. As Mr. Genoese, his township, Upper Marion Township, they just put some career guys on. And it's working wonderfully. I mean, you see the results of it. The volunteers don't have to go to all the fire alarms. As he said, 495 out of the 500 are false alarms. We're up in Lower Marion Township up to close to 1,000 false alarms a year. Our guys are getting killed by these things. So we do have some career staff. I think we need to utilize them differently. I think the standard of cover will help with that. So we just need to stop duplicating things, I think.
On the apparatus issue, one of the things that I've been fortunate to do over the last 15 years is serve on FEMA's grant criteria committee. So the Assistance to Firefighter grant program, the SAFER grant, I actually am one of the few people who helped build the criteria used by the evaluators to give those grants out. In fire apparatus, we have actually identified what are the minimum requirements for a fire engine and have worked with manufacturers to build the FEMA fire truck, if you will. So that if you get a FEMA grant, we give you X amount of dollars for that particular type of truck, whether it's an engine or a ladder truck, because that's what the manufacturers have told us will suffice for a quality vehicle to meet those service demands, and it ranges from the biggest of cities to the smallest of suburbs.
During my 10 years as fire commissioner, I heard the state needs to do more to help us with purchasing, blah, 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 blah. So the CoStarz program picked up contracts for fire and EMS, not only for loose equipment, for apparatus. So there is a program in CoStarz now, but I would tell you, I don't know what the number is now, the participation by fire departments in that program is probably minuscule to what it could be. It's not the easiest program to navigate, but nonetheless, the fire and EMS community made the noise. The General Assembly reacted. We got CoStarz contracts, and I don't think the fire and EMS community really take advantage of it. I can recall having a conversation with, I believe it might have even been this committee, I don't remember anymore, about doing something with a volunteer loan assistance program where if you came to us and said, we want to buy a ladder truck, our question you would be is how many ladder trucks exist in your community now? And if there wasn't a need for that ladder truck, you could buy the ladder truck, but we weren't going to give you any of the state 2% money to buy it because we actually perpetuate the duplication of services at the state level with the loan program. You come to me and want to buy a ladder truck, I'll give you the 2% money if you're qualified, and there's already 5 ladder trucks within a quarter of a mile where you're sitting at. So we had that discussion, and I was basically told, have you fallen on your head? We don't want to regulate, we're already having trouble recruiting volunteers. Now you want to make it more difficult for them to get loans. We came up with, we attempted the same thing. We met with the manufacturers and said, give us the price for what a fire truck should look like that meets the standard, maybe even exceeds the standard, and it doesn't have all the stainless steel and the chrome and stuff on it. And one of the comments made to me was, what do you want to do, ruin the 4th of July parades? But the point was, give us a price, we put it on a sliding scale, and the closer that your spec or your price was to that price, the more money you would get out of the loan program. So if the manufacturer said a fire engine, a pumper should cost $400,000, and I'll just grab a number, if you were close to 400 or below it, the scale, we would give you a little more in the loan program. If you exceeded $400,000, go away. You're not getting any of 2% money at all. That requires a change to the legislation in the loan program. And the only folks that can do that are you. The fire commissioner can't do it. I mean, if the fire commissioner attempted, because the fire commissioner is allowed to create the guidelines for the program according to the law, if the fire commissioner, the current fire commissioner or the previous fire commissioner came out with something like that in a guideline, can you imagine how many of your phones would light up? And the first thing you're going to do is pick the phone up and call the fire commissioner and say, what is wrong with you? What are you trying to do? So if it's going to get fixed, it has to get fixed legislatively. We've heard talk about a commission, all right? Because if you create a commission, then we remove the politics from it. You're going to have to put something into law with the commission that gives the fire commissioner the ability to promulgate regulation and rules, and then you got to be willing to stick behind them. And I'll give you examples of you all not sticking behind the fire commissioner. Not all of you. You all meaning a term of endearment from the South, okay? When I was the fire commissioner, the very first time that we got the grant program reauthorized, there was a part of the grant program that said, if you're a fire department and you're getting a grant, you shall participate in a Pennsylvania Incident Reporting System, or PENFERS. And we were having an SR-60 meeting at Pima, and everybody sitting in the room involved with the fire and ambulance service said, we agree, it's time to draw a line in the sand. If they're not participating in PENFERS, they don't get a grant. Within an hour, there were 25 signatures of members of the Senate on a petition laying on Governor Rendell's desk that said, he changes his mind or you should find another fire commissioner. The next day, there was a similar letter delivered to the governor from the House, signed by about 25 members that said the same thing. I got summoned downtown. Ed, this is our first year as governor. We need these people's support. You need to take one for the team. So guess what? We never enforced the PENFERS requirement. Well, then we started getting tough on final reports. If you don't submit a final report, you don't get a grant next year. As soon as a fire department or an ambulance service doesn't submit their final report and the fire commissioner says, sorry, you don't get a grant this year, what do? They call you. And what do? Hey, Commissioner, come on now. You got to find a way to give them their grant. I know they were late with their report, but they've never been late before. So if you create the commission, all I'm saying to you is, if you give the fire commissioner the ability in the law to set standards, then by God, you got to support whatever the fire commissioner decides to do in the way of standards. And that may scare you off from wanting to create the commission. Because if you ended up with Ayatollah Khomeini as the fire commissioner, God knows what you'd end up with.
I was just going to say, and Ed said it goes along with Senator Williams, that's part of the reason for this commission.
If I could just say finally, thank you so much for your time. Ed, you've got to break out of your shell. Your shyness is concerning me a little bit. But I really do want to commend you all for your service as a retired Marine. I want to tell you, we really appreciate what you do for our communities. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay.